Picture this. You're 367 feet below an ice-covered pond, wedged in a freezing underwater tunnel so narrow you can barely move, and the friend you came here with is dying right in front of your eyes. But if you panic, even for a second, you'll drown too. This nightmare became reality on February 6, 2014, when 5 elite Finnish cave divers descended into Norway's Pluragrata cave system with one audacious goal: to traverse nearly 2,000 meters through one of the deepest, most unforgiving underwater labyrinths on Earth. Only 3 would make it back alive, and what happened next, the illegal recovery mission that followed 46 days later, would become one of the most daring underwater operations ever documented: the Forbidden Dive. The Plura cave system sits beneath a frozen river valley just south of the Arctic Circle in Norway, carved through ancient limestone that transformed into marble over millions of years. It's not just deep, it's the deepest diveable cave in northern Europe, plunging to depths exceeding 425 feet. The water temperature hovers between 2 and 7 degrees Celsius, cold enough to kill you within minutes if your dry suit tears on the jagged cave walls. Most divers who visit Plura enter from the dry cave side, called Steinugelflaget, descending over 100 meters through a vertical climb just to reach the water. They swim in, admire the pristine marble formations, and turn back the way they came. But for truly obsessed cave divers, there's another challenge entirely: the traverse. Starting from a small frozen pond on the opposite side, threading through nearly 2,000 meters of underwater passages, squeezing through restrictions where a single wrong move means death, then ascending into Steinugelflaget, where a 90-meter vaulted ceiling rises overhead with daylight flickering through a crack in the hillside. In September 2013, 3 Finnish divers, Patrick Grönqvist, a firefighter by trade, along with Kai Kenkinen and Sami Pakarinen, became the first to successfully complete this traverse from the Steinugelflaget side. It was a monumental achievement in the cave diving community, the kind of first ascent that gets whispered about in diving forums worldwide. But they'd done it the easy way, starting from the dry cave and finishing at the pond. Now, in February 2014, they wanted to do it backwards, starting from the hardest entrance, the ice-covered pond, and navigating to Steinugelflaget. It was the ultimate test, a dive that would take 5 hours if everything went perfectly, requiring underwater scooters called DPVS, diver propulsion vehicles, to cover the distance, and demanding they descend to 130 meters, deeper than the length of a football field, while managing gas supplies according to the sacred rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is simple in theory, brutal in practice. You use 1/3 of your breathing gas getting in, 1/3 getting out, and keep 1/3 in reserve for emergencies. Because in an overhead environment like a cave, you can't just shoot to the surface if something goes wrong. The only way out is the way you came in. 5 men gathered for this expedition: Patrick Grönqvist and Kai Kenkinen, the veterans who'd pioneered the route; Jari Huotarinen, Patrick's close friend attempting the traverse for the first time; Vesa Rantanen, an experienced diver eager to test himself in Plura's depths; and Jari Uusimäki, known among the group as deliberate and methodical, never one to rush. But here's the thing, and this detail would haunt them forever: they didn't do proper preparation dives. No reconnaissance runs from the pond side. No practice squeezing through the restrictions with full gear. No emergency gas caches placed along the route. As Patrick would later admit with devastating honesty, "If we had done a practice run, things would have been different. It was totally our own fault." Into the abyss. On that February morning, the team arrived at the frozen pond with a trailer full of equipment: a snowmobile, multiple DPVEs, dozens of diving tanks, dry suits, rebreathers, and enough gear to outfit a small expedition. They cut a triangular hole through the ice and split into 2 groups. Patrick and Jari Huotarinen would go first. 2 hours later, after the sediment settled, Vesa, Jari Uusimäki, and Kai would follow. Patrick slipped into the water first, with Hari close behind. The plan was straightforward: descend through 500 meters of relatively shallow water, pass through a 250-meter-long air chamber where they could briefly surface, then make the deep dive. the terrifying U-shaped section that bottoms out at 130 meters. When everything goes wrong, Patrick navigated through a particularly tight restriction and looked back for Hari's light. It wasn't there. He waited. Seconds stretched, then he saw it. Hari's light waving frantically up and down. The universal distress signal, Patrick immediately swam back. At 367 feet below the surface, he found Hari in trouble. The line attached to Hari's underwater scooter had somehow become wedged under a massive rock. Hari was stuck, and he was panicking. This is where you need to understand something crucial about rebreathers. Unlike regular scuba gear that releases bubbles with every breath, rebreathers recycle your exhaled gas, scrubbing out the carbon dioxide and adding fresh oxygen. It's efficient, extending dive time dramatically. But it has a fatal weakness. If you breathe too fast, if you panic, the system can't remove CO2 quickly enough. You start rebreathing your own carbon dioxide. It's called hypercapnia, and it's 20 times more narcotic than nitrogen. Your mind unravels, confusion sets in, you make catastrophically bad decisions. Patrick could see it happening. Hari was hyperventilating, trapped in a feedback loop of fear. Thinking quickly, Patrick tried to help Hari remove a bailout cylinder that seemed to be causing problems. He moved his own scooter out of the way. "Hari kept yelling at me to come back," Patrick would later recall. "I shouted back that I won't be more than a couple of seconds, calm down." But Jari couldn't calm down. Patrick finally saw the problem. Jari's scooter line was hopelessly tangled under the rock. In a desperate attempt to help, Patrick switched Jari's breathing system from the rebreather to open-circuit bailout gas, trying to give him fresh oxygen to clear the building's CO2 from his system. It was the wrong move. In his panicked, confused state, Hari couldn't handle the switch. He began swallowing the ice-cold water of the cave. Within moments, Hari Huotarinen was dead, suspended in the water at 112 meters depth, his body blocking the only passage forward. Patrick was now alone, his friend's corpse floating before him in the narrow restriction. He tried frantically to free the body, pulling, adjusting, desperate to clear the passage for the divers he knew would be coming behind him. Nothing worked, and every minute he spent here at this crushing depth was adding hours to his required decompression time. He had a choice that no human should ever face: stay with his friend's body and die here himself, or leave Hari behind and swim toward the only exit. Survival instinct kicked in. Patrick turned and swam forward into the darkness, knowing the second team would soon encounter what he was leaving behind. The second team's nightmare. Because he'd spent nearly 20 minutes at 110 meters trying to save Hari, Patrick's dive computer calculated he would now need 6 hours and 40 minutes of decompression stops. But after 7 hours underwater, his gas was running dangerously low. He made the agonizing decision to skip his final decompression stop at 6 meters and surface anyway, knowing he was risking his life but having no other choice. When he finally broke through into the Steinugelflaget cave, he had no idea if anyone else would make it. Meanwhile, 2 hours after Patrick and Jari had entered the cave, the second team dropped into the water. Vesa Rantanen led the group, followed by Hari Usimäki and Kai Kankinen. They had no idea what awaited them in the depths. Vesa reached the restriction at 110 meters, and his world stopped. Jari Huotarinen's lifeless body blocked the passage. In that instant, Vesa had perhaps 10 seconds to make an impossible calculation. Turn back meant swimming through the deepest section of the cave with no guarantee he had enough gas. Going back would require even longer decompression than going forward. But going forward meant something psychologically devastating, squeezing his body past his dead friend's corpse in a tunnel so narrow he'd have to feel every inch of Hari's lifeless body against him. Vesa chose to push forward. It took him more than 15 minutes of nightmarish struggle to squeeze through, having to remove some of his own equipment just to fit past Jerry's body. Those 15 minutes at depth added catastrophic decompression obligations. When Vesa finally surfaced 90 minutes before his computer said it was safe, he was already feeling the symptoms: pressure building in his joints, pain shooting through his elbows and knees. The nitrogen bubbles were forming in his blood and tissues. Decompression sickness? The bends. And this case would be severe enough to cause permanent spinal cord damage. Behind Vesa, Hari Uzumaki faced the same horrific scene. But unlike Vesa, Yari couldn't handle it. He panicked. His breathing accelerated. The carbon dioxide built up in his rebreather system. Somewhere in those dark passages, Yari Uzumaki lost consciousness and drowned, becoming the second fatality of the day. That left only Kai Kankinen trailing behind. When he encountered the blocked passage and realized Yari Uzumaki was in trouble, Kai made a different choice. He turned around. He would swim back through the deepest section of the cave, back through all those passages, back to the frozen pond where they'd started. It would require every ounce of discipline he possessed. One mistake, one moment of panic, and he'd become the third victim. For 11 hours, Kai swam alone through the freezing darkness, making decompression stop after decompression stop, his only focus on his family waiting above. When he finally reached the pond entrance, he discovered a thin layer of ice had reformed over the hole. He punched through it and dragged himself onto the ice, the only member of the second team to survive. The aftermath and the promise. All three survivors were rushed to hospitals suffering from severe decompression sickness. Visa's case was so extreme he required treatment in a recompression chamber in Berlin, Germany, ultimately suffering permanent spinal cord damage. Patrick had surfaced 30 minutes before his computer indicated it was safe. Kai had pushed his body to its absolute limits during that 11-hour ordeal. As they recovered in hospital beds, Norwegian police interrogated them and shut down the cave. An elite British diving team, including renowned cave rescue diver Rick Stanton, assessed the situation and declared it too dangerous. The bodies would stay in the cave indefinitely. But Patrick Grinqvist had made a promise. He'd looked Jari Huotarinen's widow in the eyes and told her, "We would go and get them. They are not going to be left there." The illegal recovery mission. On March 20th, 2014, 46 days after the tragedy, an extraordinary group assembled in secret. 27 divers in total, 17 Finns and 10 Norwegians, sneaking equipment into the valley using trucks, cars, sleds, and snowmobiles. This time, they planned for everything. They built a 20-foot underwater habitat attached to the cave walls that could serve as a dry decompression chamber. They placed 50 backup cylinders at strategic decompression stops throughout the system. Support teams would work at shallower depths at both entrances. The main recovery team would dive from the Plura Pond side. Patrick Grinqvist, Sami Pakarinen, and Kai Kankinen. Vesa Rantanen, still recovering from his injuries, would coordinate from the surface at Steinugelflaget. At 85 meters depth, Kai had to abort. The psychological weight was too much. Patrick and Sami continued alone into the depths. At 112 meters, they found Hari Huotarinen's body, exactly as Patrick had left him 7 weeks earlier, still tangled in his scooter line at the restriction. Just 20 meters beyond floated Hari Uzumaki. The GoPro cameras captured everything. The divers' torches catching the jagged cave walls, the intermittent whirring of DPVs, the sound of controlled breathing, and the moment they cut Hari Huotarinen free from his entanglement. The recovery took 5 hours of underwater work, bringing Hari Huotarinen's body through the system to the dry cave side of Steinugelflaget. The next day, they returned for Hari Uzumaki, entering from the opposite side. During this second recovery, a section of the cave collapsed onto Patrick. The GoPro caught it all. A boulder falling, nearly crushing him, a terrifying reminder of how close they all were to becoming victims themselves. But they succeeded. Both bodies were recovered, and though the operation was illegal, defying the official diving ban, Norwegian authorities never filed charges. 6 months after the incident, the Finnish president awarded Patrick Grinqvist a Medal of Honor. The cave reopened to divers in March 2014, just days after the recovery. The rule in technical diving is simple. Plan your dive and dive your plan. Have contingencies for every failure mode. Never exceed your limits. But more than anything, remember that in an overhead environment, panic is as deadly as running out of air. Because 367 feet below an ice-covered pond in northern Norway, if you can't keep your breathing under control, the cave will kill you, and it will take the friends trying to save you down with you. From above, it looks like a swampy puddle in the middle of nowhere, just a small algae-covered pond tucked inside a wildlife preserve in Florida. Mosquitoes buzz, the water's murky, and if anything, it looks like a breeding ground for gators. Not world-class divers, but that's the trick. Beneath the scummy surface of this nondescript pool lies one of the deepest, most complex underwater cave systems in North America. A portal into darkness, known simply as Eagle's Nest. Divers have another name for it, the Mount Everest of cave diving. And like Everest, it's beautiful, it's famous, it's deadly. This isn't some open water resort dive. It's a vertical shaft more than 6 feet wide that drops down into an enormous underground chamber the size of an airplane hangar. A place so dark, so massive, it's been described as otherworldly. Floating there feels like drifting through deep space, and once you've entered that black expanse, you're only just beginning. What lies beyond is a tangled web of winding tunnels, silt-lined passageways, and bone-tight restrictions. This is a cave that eats lights, disorients minds, and claims lives. More than a dozen divers have died here. Not careless amateurs, not thrill-chasing daredevils, certified cave divers, technical experts, men and women who knew the rules, understood the risks, and still ended up lost in the dark. The danger is written in bold right at the mouth of the cave, a grim reaper painted on a sign warning divers not to go further, and below him, a chilling message. Stop, prevent your death. There is nothing in this cave worth dying for. Yet every year they keep coming. Because Eagle's Nest isn't just a dive, it's a test, a proving ground, a siren call for those obsessed with depth, darkness, and the razor-thin edge between mastery and mortality. And it all starts with the descent. At just 20 feet below the surface, the pond's floor gives way to a vertical shaft, narrow, smooth, and almost hypnotic. It sucks divers downward into the heart of the cave. A short drop, and suddenly everything opens up. The ballroom. A massive chamber of black water stretching in all directions. There's no ceiling here, no floor, just suspended particles and the weak beam of a flashlight slicing through the dark. Divers report a kind of eerie peace. It's silent, weightless, beautiful. But beauty down here comes with baggage. The moment a diver enters the ballroom, the rules change. Time stretches, orientation fades. There's no up, no down, just water and darkness pressing from all sides. Flashlights carve only narrow cones through the murk, and the rest is a void that seems to swallow everything, even thought. Breathing becomes the only sound, loud inside the mask, rhythmic, constant, a metronome counting down. It's easy to get lulled into false confidence. The space feels open, forgiving, but that illusion is what makes the ballroom dangerous. Divers who linger here too long begin to forget how deep they are, how far from safety they've already drifted. At the bottom of the ballroom lies a sloped debris mound, a graveyard of rock, rust, and memory. This is where many stash extra tanks, a waypoint for what's to come. From here, 3 tunnels branch off, each one inviting, each one different. The upstream tunnel is narrow and disorienting, twisting like a serpent into the unknown. The downstream tunnels, tighter still, with dead ends, abrupt drops, and silt that waits for the wrong kick to blind. It's here that lines must be laid with precision. A diver's life depends on a cord of nylon and their ability to find it in pitch black. One wrong turn, one missed marker, and the way out might as well be on another planet. This part of the dive is where gear gets caught, where air consumption spikes, where minds already fogged by nitrogen begin to betray. Divers talk about losing track of time, of hearing things, of light flickering without cause. The cave starts to feel alive, and not in a comforting way. Those who survive the nest often speak of an overwhelming sense of being watched, not by people, by the cave itself. as if the earth is holding its breath, waiting to decide whether to let the intruder go or keep them forever. But it's also deceptive because at the bottom of the ballroom there are choices. 3 tunnel mouths split off into the unknown, 2 downstream, 1 upstream. From here things get narrow, twisted, and unforgiving. And this is where the cave has claimed lives. December 25th, 2013, Christmas Day, Darren Spivey, 35, and his son Dylan Sanchez, just 15, were excited. New tanks, a father-son dive, and a shared love for the water. Darren was certified. Dylan wasn't. But that didn't stop them from descending together, and they made it down past 230 feet. At that depth, breathing regular air isn't just inefficient, it's dangerous. The pressure warps the mind. Nitrogen builds up in the bloodstream. It causes confusion, poor decisions, and sometimes euphoria. Divers call it rapture of the deep. They never came back. Their dive computers showed they'd stayed too long. Ran out of air. Dylan was found near a set of spare tanks they'd stashed. Tanks they couldn't reach in time. Darren's body was at the bottom of the ballroom. Dylan had tried to share his father's regulator when their tanks ran dry. It wasn't enough. The rescue team that found them said it looked like a story frozen in time. The father and son, suspended in silence, locked in a desperate effort that had come too late. Their dive logs told the rest. Steady descent, prolonged bottom time, erratic ascent, classic signs of nitrogen narcosis. But it wasn't just depth that killed them. It was decision-making clouded by invisible forces. Down there, at over 230 feet, compressed air becomes a trap. Minds blur. Simple math becomes impossible. What should be a short pause turns into long minutes, lost in the dark. And that's exactly what happened. They overstayed, burned through their primary tanks. By the time panic set in, it was already too late. Dylan, young and likely terrified, had done what anyone would, reached for his father, but 2 people on 1 failing air supply only quickened the end. Their spare tanks were staged properly, but reaching them meant swimming against pressure, against confusion, against time. Dylan got close. He was just feet away from the backup air when he finally lost consciousness. Divers later said his hand was outstretched toward the tank valve. A few seconds more, and maybe it would have been different. But the cave doesn't deal in maybes, it deals in absolutes. And for Darren and Dylan, that Christmas morning turned into one of Eagle's Nest's most haunting stories. Friends described Darren as a cautious diver, someone who took pride in gear prep, in protocols. But even cautious divers can be blindsided by the trap of overconfidence. Maybe he thought it was just a quick dip. Maybe the new tanks gave a false sense of security. Or maybe, like so many before him, he underestimated just how fast things unravel inside the nest. What made the tragedy hit even harder was the timing. Christmas Day, while others opened gifts, laughed around trees, and shared meals, Darren and Dylan were spending their final moments in total silence, buried beneath 230 feet of black water. And when the news broke, the diving community didn't just mourn, they debated. Some said it was recklessness. Others said it was a reminder that even love and bonding moments shouldn't override safety. One thing was certain. Eagle's Nest didn't care who they were. Father, son, novice, veteran. The cave treats them all the same. They'd made a fatal miscalculation. And the cave showed no mercy. That same story, different names, plays out again and again. 2 experienced divers, John and Craig, dove deep into Eagle's Nest using an underwater scooter. It helped them cover more ground. But with speed came danger. At some point, the scooter disturbed the silt. Visibility dropped to 0. Panic set in. Instead of following the guideline toward the exit, they got turned around. John dropped his scooter and began blindly feeling his way through the murk, except he was headed the wrong way. His body was found 1,000 feet inside one of the cave's farthest tunnels. Craig was found 2 days later, tangled in a line out of gas. They had the skills, they had the experience. What they didn't have was forgiveness from the cave. And in 2016, another tragedy. Patrick Peacock and Chris Rittenmeyer weren't just experienced, they were meticulous. They prepped the site a day early, stashed tanks, planned decompression stops, used rebreathers for longer dive time. They had a third diver, Justin, who stayed in the shallower depths to monitor them. At 3 p.m., Justin dove to the agreed depth. No sign of Patrick or Chris. He checked again at 3:30, then 4, then 5. Still nothing. At 6 p.m., he called for help. The rescue divers didn't enter until nearly midnight. They found the bodies the next day just past a section known as the pit. Dive computers showed that Patrick and Chris had tried to enter a tight restriction, backed out, then tried again. Something went wrong. One removed his rebreather. They began buddy breathing from a single tank. They didn't make it to their bailout bottles. It's believed one of them got stuck and the other died trying to free him. Even when everything is planned, when every precaution is taken, the smallest failure at Eagle's Nest can be fatal. And the list doesn't stop there. There was Brent in 1990, a new cave diver, certified instructor with a known history of blackouts. He entered the cave and never resurfaced, found unconscious at 190 feet. Terry in 1981, mid-dive with her husband, she lost her regulator and went still. Her husband tried to save her. When he surfaced, he found a photographer named Jim Bentz, who happened to be a rescue diver. Jim grabbed a tank and dove in. He didn't come back either. The cave took them both. In 2017, a diver named Charles went limp at 100 feet. No panic, no obvious error, just sudden unconsciousness. He died on the way up. Autopsy said it was a heart attack. In 2018, Davin, an experienced diver and spear fisherman, died at only 70 feet. Also a heart attack. Sometimes it's not the cave. Sometimes it's just the body giving out under stress. That same year, a young free diver named Saeed tried to beat his personal record. One final breath-hold dive down to the ballroom. He never returned. His body was recovered at 150 feet. That's the thing about Eagle's Nest. The cave isn't out to get anyone. It doesn't move. It doesn't choose. But it's indifferent to error, no matter how small. Even veterans with hundreds of dives under their belts have been overwhelmed here. And still they come. Because diving Eagle's Nest earns bragging rights. It's a rite of passage in the cave diving world. Some call it obsession. Others call it honor. The statistics are chilling. Between 1981 and 2018, at least 13 divers lost their lives here. That's 1 in every 11 U.S. cave diving deaths, just from this single site. But the cave diving community sees Eagle's Nest differently. It's not just a hole in the ground, it's a monument, a test of skill, a sacred place for those drawn to the edge of the unknown. And that's the paradox, because Eagle's Nest is breathtaking. The ballroom is like floating in space. The silence, the pressure, the feeling of drifting inside the earth, it changes people. It calls them back, and sometimes it doesn't let them go. So maybe that Grim Reaper sign at the entrance isn't just a warning. Maybe it's a mirror, a reflection of what can happen when passion turns into obsession, when confidence becomes overconfidence, when a cave stops being just a cave and starts becoming something else. And so the divers keep coming, and the cave keeps waiting. Still.
Occhio, piano, piano! 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 È verticale, ragazzi, veloce perché gli fa male!
In the freezing dark, 1,000 meters below the surface of the earth, time feels different. Every second drags, every breath counts. The walls of solid limestone don't just echo your voice, they remind you just how far you are from sunlight, from help, from life itself. At exactly 11:44 a.m. on June 19, 2014, a stretcher emerged from the gaping mouth of Germany's deepest cave. Attached to it was a man who had spent nearly 2 weeks in a place no one ever expects to survive, let alone be rescued from. And what it took to get him out was unlike anything Europe had ever attempted before. It all began on June 7th, a Saturday. In Bavaria, near the Austrian border, lies a cave that doesn't just intimidate, it devours. Riesending. In German, it literally translates to giant thing, and it lives up to the name. More than 1,000 meters deep and nearly 20,000 feet in total mapped length, Riesending is no tourist attraction. It's an unforgiving network of vertical shafts, narrow chimneys, freezing underground rivers, and complete darkness. 3 people entered that day, among them Johann Westhauser, a 52-year-old physicist and speleologist. But Johann wasn't just a visitor, he was one of the people who helped discover parts of this very cave. He knew its dangers better than most. Years of experience had taken him through the depths of the earth before. But this time, something would go terribly wrong. What made Johann stand out wasn't just his technical knowledge, but his sheer dedication to understanding one of Earth's most inaccessible frontiers. He had logged countless hours underground, mapping caverns others wouldn't dare approach. This wasn't some casual weekend trip. It was a continuation of years of committed scientific exploration. The cave, known for swallowing light and distorting time, was a place Johann respected deeply. He often said that the cave doesn't forgive mistakes, it simply waits. And Riesending wasn't just a cave, it was alive in its own way, breathing cold drafts through narrow passages, echoing distant water drips like whispers. Johann and his team had prepared meticulously. Ropes, helmets, food supplies, communication systems. Everything was double-checked. They knew the terrain could shift at any time, that even a single misstep could change everything. Yet they pressed on, because this was more than exploration. It was passion and it was purpose. They planned to stay for days, to push further, to document more of the unknown. As they descended deeper into the belly of the mountain, their voices quieted. Every sound began to matter. The crunch of boots on gravel, the soft clink of gear, the heavy, muffled stillness of the world far beneath our own. Down here, light doesn't reach, and the only clock is your heartbeat. For Johann, this cave held mysteries he couldn't resist. But that very curiosity was about to be tested like never before. Sometime after midnight, early on June 8th, while the group was around 1,000 meters into the cave, disaster struck. Out of nowhere, a rock fall. There was no warning, no rumble, just a sudden impact. A rock came crashing down and struck Johann on the head. He was wearing a helmet, but even that wasn't enough. He suffered a traumatic brain injury. In any regular setting, that would already be serious. But this wasn't regular. This was a pitch-black maze, a kilometer beneath the surface. And they had no way of calling for help. No radios, no cell signal, nothing. Immediately, the team sprang into action. One of the 2 colleagues stayed behind with Johann, monitoring him, keeping him conscious and trying to prevent further damage. The other began what would become one of the most grueling solitary journeys imaginable. A 10-hour climb through vertical shafts, slippery rocks, narrow squeeze passages, and freezing cold water for 10 hours straight. No assistance, no light but a headlamp, just a single person crawling and climbing their way toward the surface to get help. It's hard to fully grasp what that journey must have felt like. Every muscle in the body strained, hands blistered from gripping wet ropes and jagged stone, knees scraped raw from tight passages no wider than a person's chest. At times, the path demanded crawling face first through water, where one wrong move meant slipping back several meters. The cold seeped in with every step, biting at the skin, numbing the fingers, making every small task feel monumental. There was no time to rest, no option to stop. The adrenaline pulsed hard, but fear rode alongside it. Fear of getting stuck, fear of making a noise that could trigger more rockfall, fear of not making it out at all. But quitting wasn't on the table. Above ground, Johann's life depended on this climb. That kind of pressure can break people. But this climber kept going, fueled by urgency, determination, and the silent promise not to let his teammate die in the dark. Every corner turned felt like a small win. Every flicker of reflected light on the rocks gave hope. And when that first whisper of daylight finally broke through, it wasn't just sunlight, it was survival. That call for help triggered what would grow into the largest cave rescue operation in Germany's history, and one of the biggest the world has ever seen. By that evening, 3 cave rescue teams had already entered Riesending. 11 people in total, and their mission was clear: get to Johann, assess his condition, keep him alive, and begin planning a way to get him out. It sounds simple on paper, but inside the cave, nothing is simple. Even reaching Johann took days. The terrain was so technical that every movement forward needed careful rope work, anchor points, and safety protocols. This wasn't just about a rescue, it was a life-threatening mission for everyone involved. Back on the surface, news of the incident spread quickly. More teams were brought in from Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, Croatia. Eventually, over 700 personnel would be involved in the rescue: cave divers, medics, engineers, speleologists, logistics teams, helicopter pilots. Everyone had a role to play. But the cave? The cave didn't care. It remained cold, unstable, relentless. To even begin the rescue, a communication system had to be set up. They used something called a cave link system, which allowed basic text messages to be transmitted through solid rock. This was essential. It meant the teams at the surface could finally start receiving updates from deep inside. Still, even with communication in place, the challenge was monumental. It wasn't until June 11th, 3 days after the accident, that a physician finally reached Johann. His name was Dr. Martin Göksu. He had to endure the same grueling descent just to get there. He examined Johann and confirmed it was a mild traumatic brain injury. Not life-threatening, but serious enough to require a specialized rescue. The fact that a doctor was able to reach Johann at all was a feat in itself. Dr. Göksu wasn't just any physician. He was specially trained for cave rescues, someone who understood both the science of the human body and the brutal mechanics of the underground world. He had to carry not only his own gear, but also medical supplies through twisting, narrow corridors and across slippery ledges. Hours of rappelling, crawling, climbing, and squeezing through gaps barely wide enough to breathe in. When he finally arrived, Johann was conscious but fragile, his speech slow, his body exhausted. Every movement had to be done with caution. Even checking his pulse or examining his pupils became a calculated effort in that environment. Dr. Göksu had to make decisions not in the comfort of a hospital, but while perched on cold rock surrounded by complete darkness, in air thick with moisture. Soon, another physician joined, descending through the same nightmare path. Together, they didn't just evaluate Johann, they stabilized him. Medications were administered, hydration managed, vitals tracked. In that damp, silent chamber a kilometer underground, it was the closest thing to an emergency room the cave had ever seen. But getting Johann medically stable was only step one. The bigger question still loomed: how do you move someone with a brain injury through miles of hellish terrain without making things worse? Another doctor arrived later that night. Together, they decided Johann could be moved. But to do so, they'd have to adapt the cave, literally. Passages had to be widened, ropes secured, footrest installed. In some places, they had to drill into the rock to create new paths. And all of this had to happen while dozens of people lived inside the cave for days at a time. Bivouac camps were set up underground. Think about that for a second. People were sleeping, eating, and working in a pitch-black cave system, meters below the earth day and night, for over a week. At peak times, up to 60 people were inside the cave at once. That's not just coordination, that's devotion. But even with preparation, the actual transport would test them all. The stretcher was custom adapted to minimize shock. It was padded and reinforced, but it still had to be carried manually. No machines could help. Engines can't operate in that kind of enclosed, oxygen-limited space. Everything had to be done by hand. And then came the vertical passages, the shafts, the climbs. Here's where the operation turned into something extraordinary. In those steep vertical sections, the rescuers had to use their own bodies as counterweights. Imagine that. One group descends, tied to the stretcher, while the other group climbs, pulling upward using only their muscle power, balancing the stretcher like a giant human pulley system. It was dangerous. Every move had to be calculated. If one person slipped, it could end in tragedy. Over 11 days, Johann was moved inch by inch, foot by foot through the cave. Supplies were continuously sent down. Food, water, medical gear, rope, batteries, all hand-carried. Every item had to be hauled up and down the same path over and over, and the cave took its toll. The temperatures were cold, the air was damp, equipment broke, people got injured, but no one stopped. Then came the final challenge, the infamous 180-meter vertical shaft. the last climb to freedom, the narrowest, steepest part of the entire system. The rescue team took a deep breath and began the final ascent. Ropes were checked, anchors reinforced, communication lines opened. Slowly, using the same human counterweight system, Johann was lifted. Every meter gained was a small victory. Tension hung in the air. And finally, at 11:44 a.m. on June 19th, Johann saw the sky again. After 12 days underground, he was winched out of the cave and immediately transported by helicopter to a trauma hospital in Murnau. He was alive, conscious, stable. It was a moment of triumph for Johann, for the rescue teams, for everyone who had watched with bated breath as updates came trickling in day by day. But the story doesn't end there. In the weeks that followed, the rescue made headlines around the world. People marveled at the coordination, the bravery, the endurance, but they also asked hard questions. The total cost of the rescue was nearly 1 million euros. Who should pay? Eventually, the Bavarian Interior Ministry announced that Johann would be contributing a substantial amount to the costs. He agreed, and most people supported the decision, recognizing both his responsibility and the incredible efforts that saved his life. In the aftermath, something else had to be dealt with, something few had thought about in the moment: trash. More than 1 ton of it. Food wrappers, batteries, medical supplies, ropes, drill bits, everything left behind in the cave during the rescue. It took another 6 years to get all of it out. The cleanup was completed by 2020, an effort crucial for the fragile cave ecosystem, where pollutants could threaten groundwater and disturb species like bats that rely on the cave's stability. And as for the cave itself, it's no longer freely accessible. After the rescue, authorities sealed off the entrance. Now, only individuals with specific permits, those with professional qualifications, a valid reason, and proven physical ability can enter Riesending. Johann, the man at the center of it all, made a full recovery, and by 2016, he was once again exploring caves, cautiously, quietly, but with the same passion that had brought him to Riesending in the first place. What happened inside that cave wasn't just a rescue. It was a display of unity, endurance, and belief in human.
I'm completely stuck. Josh! Josh, are you near me?
It was pitch black. Hundreds of feet beneath the Utah desert, in a winding limestone labyrinth, a man dangled upside down in a space no wider than a microwave. His chest was crushed against stone, his arms were pinned, his legs were locked above him, and the clock was ticking. John Edward Jones had only wanted a Thanksgiving adventure with his family. Instead, he found himself trapped in one of the narrowest, least forgiving places on Earth, Nutty Putty Cave. For 27 grueling hours, rescue teams fought against time, gravity, and geology in a desperate attempt to save him. But the cave had other plans. This is not just the story of one man. It's a story about the limits of the human body, the weight of hope, and a place so dangerous that it now serves as a tomb. Nutty Putty Cave lies west of Utah Lake in Utah County, hidden beneath the rocky desert surface. At first glance, it's unremarkable. Just a small hole in the ground, but beneath that entrance is a tangled underground network, 1,400 feet of narrow chutes, twisting tunnels, and vertical drops. It was discovered in 1960 by Dale Green and his friends, who gave it the quirky name Nutty Putty because of the soft brown clay coating much of its interior green. Almost called it Silly Putty, but decided Nutty had a better ring. The cave itself isn't massive in volume, but it's a technical challenge. This isn't the kind of place where you stroll around with a flashlight. Visitors had to crawl, squeeze, and contort their bodies to make it through. For experienced cavers, it was a fascinating test of skill. For scouts and college students who frequently visited, it was a thrilling rite of passage. But the risks were always there. Between its discovery and 2009, at least 4 major rescues had to be carried out in Nutty Putty. Some involved Boy Scouts who became wedged in its tightest spaces. Others were solo cavers who misjudged a turn. A metal gate was installed to restrict entry, and efforts were made to study the cave's use. By May 2009, Nutty Putty reopened under stricter management and a permit system. The hope was that better oversight would prevent accidents. But just 6 months later, tragedy struck. On November 24, 2009, John Edward Jones returned to Utah for Thanksgiving with his family. He was 26, a medical student at the University of Virginia, and a father to a 1-year-old daughter with another child on the way. Growing up, he and his younger brother Josh had spent many days exploring Utah's caves. They were confident, careful, and experienced, though it had been a while since either had gone caving. This trip to Nutty Putty was meant to be a fun reunion, something simple, memorable. There were 11 people in the group, including friends and family. John's pregnant wife, Emily, stayed back at home with their daughter, Lizzie, while the others went ahead. John was excited, even a little nostalgic. These caves had been a backdrop to his youth. He remembered slipping through narrow corridors with Josh, their laughter echoing off limestone walls. The cold air underground had always felt thrilling, like stepping into a secret world carved beneath the earth. It was the kind of adventure that made him feel alive. For a few hours, he could forget about medical school, long lectures, and exams. He could just be a brother again, a son, a thrill seeker with dusty boots and a headlamp. The group gathered around the entrance, checking their helmets and double-knotting their boots. Someone cracked a joke about how tight the tunnels were, and they all laughed. None of them thinking the danger was real. Permits were secured. Gear was packed. Spirits were high. They descended with the kind of excitement that comes from doing something both daring and familiar. Inside, the cave swallowed them whole. The light from the surface faded quickly, replaced by the cool, silent weight of earth pressing in on all sides. Every sound echoed. The rubber soles of boots scuffed rock. Breathing felt louder in the stillness. For most of the group, the main chambers were enough, a maze of passages wide enough to crouch, twist, and crawl without too much trouble. But John and Josh wanted more. They moved deeper, their headlamps bouncing against the jagged walls. They talked about old caves they'd explored, how different this one felt, how easy it was to get turned around in the tighter spaces. They checked the map again, trying to match the twists ahead with the rough layout they had studied. It was supposed to be simple. Find the birth canal, squeeze through, and head back to join the others. But down in the dark, nothing ever looks the way it does on paper. At first, things went smoothly. The main caverns of Nutty Putty, like the maze room and the slide, offered plenty of excitement for the group. But eventually, John, Josh, and 2 others broke off, looking for a greater challenge. They were interested in finding the birth canal, a tight but passable tunnel known for giving cavers a thrill and a bit of a panic attack. The birth canal was infamous. It was narrow, intense, but had a known turnaround point at the end. For those experienced enough to handle it, the reward was a rush of adrenaline and bragging rights. They consulted the map, and John took the lead. He headed down a narrow tunnel, crawling through the confined passageways, working past tight squeezes, small ledges, and awkward curves. The area was tricky, full of offshoots and confusing angles. After about 15 feet, the path undulated up and down, forcing him to twist and contort his body to keep going. The area was so narrow that shoulders, hips, and legs had to be rotated in a precise sequence. This section had a nickname, the corkscrew. The deeper he went, the quieter it got. The air felt heavier, more still. Even the sound of his own breathing seemed to hang in the tunnel with him. Each movement had to be deliberate. Any wrong twist of the torso could leave him wedged in place with no room to adjust. Dust flaked off the ceiling with every scrape of his clothing. He pressed his palms against the walls, guiding himself forward inch by inch, his boots trailing behind like dead weight. It wasn't just narrow, it was punishing. The cave gave no forgiveness. Every inch of progress came with scraped elbows and bruised knees. His helmet clunked against the jagged ceiling more than once. The headlamp cast flickering shadows that made the space feel even more claustrophobic, warping the walls into strange, twisting shapes. He couldn't turn around. He could barely look back. Still, John kept going. He believed the birth canal was just ahead. He pictured the chamber at the end, the small open pocket where you could finally sit up, breathe, reset. That belief kept him pushing. He'd done this kind of thing before. Tight squeezes were nothing new, But this time, something felt a little different. The walls felt closer, the angle steeper, the path less certain. He passed a rock ledge and pushed forward again, gritting his teeth as the space narrowed. At one point, he had to exhale completely just to squeeze through his chest-brush stone. His ribs groaned. There was no margin for error down here. If he made a mistake, he wouldn't be able to fix it. And still he pressed on, trusting that just a few feet ahead, the passage would open up like it always did. Beyond that, there was a rock ledge and a sharp 90-degree bend to the left. Most cavers used this area to turn back if needed. John was 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds. There was no way he was turning around here. He had to move forward. He pushed on. The tunnel narrowed again, and John sucked in his stomach to squeeze past. It looked like it might open up ahead. At least, that's what he thought. What he didn't realize was that he had passed the known section. He was no longer in the birth canal. He had accidentally entered an unmapped area near Ed's Push, a dead-end fissure only 10 inches wide and 18 inches tall. He was heading straight into a trap. At first, it didn't seem impossible. His headlamp gave him a glimpse of what looked like a hole ahead, maybe a place to turn around. So he kept going, but gravity was no longer his friend. The tunnel sloped downward. He was now moving headfirst at an angle, deeper into the rock. Suddenly, he slipped. He might have hit his head. He might have misjudged the angle, but before he knew it, he was wedged nearly upside down. His torso pressed against the rock, arms trapped, legs sticking up behind him. He was 400 feet from the entrance, stuck at a 70-degree angle, completely pinned. He yelled out to Josh. Josh called back. John told him not to follow. He was in trouble. From here, everything changed. Josh tried to reach him, going feet first through the corkscrew to avoid the same fate. He reached the ledge, saw John's legs dangling out of the tunnel, and knew this wasn't a minor inconvenience. This was serious. John tried to push, twist, pull himself free. Josh tugged on his legs, bracing against the cave wall. Nothing worked. The friction was intense. John's position gave him almost no leverage. Worse, his arms were useless. One pinned under his chest, the other pressed down by rock. They were out of time. Help was needed. Josh squeezed his way back out and contacted authorities. A massive rescue operation was set in motion. That moment marked the beginning of a rescue that would last through the night into the next day and ultimately become one of the most complex and heartbreaking caving rescues ever attempted in the United States. As the hours passed, John remained conscious. He stayed calm. He talked to rescuers, prayed, sang hymns, even cracked a few jokes. But as time wore on, the toll of being upside down began to show. The human body isn't built for that. Blood was pooling in his head. His lungs were under pressure. His organs began pressing into his diaphragm. Breathing became harder. At first, he focused on small things: slow breathing, mental distractions, thoughts of his wife and daughter. He asked rescuers how things were going, tried to stay engaged in conversation, and even asked for updates on the rescue plan. It helped him stay alert. But with each passing hour, his voice grew quieter, his sentences shorter. Eventually, even the smallest breaths felt like a struggle. His body began to betray him. The pressure in his skull increased with every minute spent inverted. His vision blurred. He experienced waves of dizziness and nausea. Rescuers noted that his responses became slower, more spaced out. His words slurred. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was a battle with gravity, and gravity was winning. His legs started to go numb first. What began as tingling soon turned to full loss of sensation. His limbs were turning cold and discolored, the blood unable to circulate properly, muscle fatigue set in. Then spasms. His arms, pinned and twisted, ached with the strain of trying to support even a fraction of his weight. Still, he never panicked. Not once did he scream or lose composure. Instead, he held on. He leaned into faith, into memories, into the voices of those reaching out to him from the darkness. One rescuer said John told them he saw angels. Another heard him whisper about being ready, just in case things didn't go the way they hoped. As the cave closed in tighter, John's world shrank to the sound of his own breath and the flicker of his headlamp reflecting off limestone. But even the strongest spirit can only endure so much when the body begins to fail, and yet, for now, there was still hope. Rescuers worked tirelessly, trying multiple strategies. The team set up a rope and pulley system anchored throughout the cave. The setup was complex. Pulleys snaked through tight corners and sharp turns, losing efficiency at every angle, but it was their best shot. By midnight, John had been upside down for nearly 12 hours. His breathing grew shallow. His voice weakened. A rescuer named Susie Mata reached him, one of the first to make contact. She was small, just over 5 feet tall, which allowed her to navigate the corkscrew more easily. She tied straps around John's legs and fed the rope back through the tunnel. They began pulling. It seemed to work at first. John moved an inch, then another, but the friction from the rock was brutal. Every tug caused pain. John begged them to stop. His legs were turning blue. The angle of the tunnel worked against them. Eventually, the system failed. A pulley anchor broke free, snapping the rope and sending metal careening into a rescuer's face. John slid back into the crevice. Everything reset. And with that, so much hope unraveled in seconds. The weight of the cave closed back in, and the clock kept ticking. The team had to regroup, re-strategize, and push forward, because even in the darkest places, you don't stop fighting. If this story moved you, if you value deep storytelling that honors real lives and real events, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know and allows us to keep bringing stories like John's to life, respectfully, honestly, and powerfully. Tap the bell to stay updated, and thank you for watching.